She seldom photographed people. Occasionally, she would take a picture of Pearl, as with the bed on the lawn, but she never used them in her work. She never used herself either. Once, Pearl told Moody she had done a series of self-portraits, wearing different objects as masks: a piece of black lace, 5-fingered horse chestnut leaves, a damp and pliant starfish. Had spent a month on these photos, narrowing them down to a set of 8. They'd been beautiful and eerie, and even now Pearl could see them exactly. Her mother's bright eye like a pearl peeking out between the legs of the starfish. But at the last moment, Mia had burned the prints and negatives, for reasons even Pearl could not fathom. "You spent all that time," she said, and just poofed. She snapped her fingers. "Like that?" "They weren't working," was all Mia would say. But the pictures she did keep and sold were startling. In the luxurious sublet in Ann Arbor, Mia had taken various pieces of her host's furniture apart and arranged the components. Bolts as thick as her finger, unvarnished cross beams, disembodied feet into animals, a bulky secretary desk from the 19th century transformed into a bull, the size of the disassembled drawers forming muscled legs, the cast iron knobs of its drawer pulls serving as the bull's nose and eyes and glinting balls, a handful of pence from inside the desk fanned out in the crescents of horns. With Pearl's help, she had laid the pieces out on the cream-colored Persian carpet, which as a backdrop looked like a field fogged with steam. And then she had climbed on top of a table to photograph it from above before they picked it back apart and reassembled it into a desk. An old Chinese bird cage, broken down into a web of arced wires, had become an eagle, its brassy skeletal wings spread as if about to take a flight. An overstuffed sofa had become an elephant, trunk raised in trumpet song. The series of photos that emerged from this project were both intriguing and unsettling, the animals incredibly intricate and lifelike, and then you looked closer and realized what they had been made of. She had called quite a few of these through her friend Anita, a gallery owner in New York, a person Pearl had never met in a place she'd never been. Mia hated New York, would never go even to promote her own work. "Anita," Mia had said into the phone once, "I love you dearly, but I cannot come to New York for a show. No, not even if it meant I'd sell 100 pieces. A pose." "I know it does, but you know I can't." "All right. You do what you can, and that's good enough for me." Still, Anita had managed to sell half dozen of the series, which meant instead of cleaning houses, Mia had been able to spend the next 6 months working on a new project. That was how her mother worked. One project for 4 or 6 months, then on to the next. She'd worked and come up with a group of photos, and Anita would usually be able to sell at least a few of them in her gallery. At first, the prices had been so modest, a few $100 per piece. Then Mia sometimes had to take on 2 jobs or even 3. But as time went on, her work became regarded well enough in the art world that Anita could sell more pieces for more money, enough to pay for what Mia and Pearl needed: food, rent, gas for the rabbit, even after Anita's 50% cut. $2,000 or $3,000 sometimes. Pearl told him with pride, and Moody did quick mental math. If Mia sold 10 pictures a year, sometimes the photos did not sell. A project Mia did with skeletal leaves sold only 1, and for several months she took up a series of odd jobs: house cleaning, flower arranging, cake decorating. She was good at anything that involved her hands, and she preferred the jobs where she did not have to work with customers, where she could be alone and thinking, to waitressing, secretarying, sales clerking. I was a sales girl once before you were born, she told Pearl. I lost it one day, one. The manager kept telling me how to put the dresses on hangers. Customers would pull their beads off clothes and demand discounts. I'd rather mop a floor alone in the house than deal with that. But other projects did sell and got attention. One series, which Mia began after she'd been doing some seamstress work, supported them for nearly a year. She would go to thrift stores and buy old stuffed animals, faded teddy bears, ratty plush dogs, threadbare rabbits. The cheaper the better. At home, she took them apart at the seams, washed their pelts, fluffed their filling, repolished their eyes. Then she stitched them back together inside out, and the results were eerily beautiful. The rag's fur in reverse took on the look of shorn velvet. The whole animal, resewn and restuffed, had the same shape but a different bearing, the backs and necks straighter, the ears perkier, the eyes shone now with a knowing glint. It was as if the animal had been reincarnated, older and bolder and wiser. Pearl had loved watching her mother at work, bent over the kitchen table, laboring with the precision of a surgeon, scalpel, needle, pins to transform these toys into art. Anita had sold every photo in this series. One had even, she reported, made its way to MOMA. She'd begged Mia to take another round or to reprint the series, but Mia had refused. The idea is done, she said. I'm working on something else, and she always was. Always something a bit different, always something that had struck her fancy. She would be famous someday, Pearl was certain. Someday her adored mother would be one of those artists, like de Kooning or Warhol or O'Keeffe, whose name everyone knew. It was why part of her, at least, didn't mind the life they'd always lived. Their thrift store clothes, the salvaged beds and chairs, the shifting precariousness of it all. One day, everyone would see her mother's brilliance. To Moody, this kind of existence was all but unfathomable. Watching the Warrens live was like watching a magic trick, as miraculous as transforming an empty soda can into a silver pitcher, or pulling a streaming pie from a silk top hat. No, he thought, it was like watching Robinson Crusoe conjure up a living out of nothingness. The more time he spent with Mia and Pearl, the more fascinated he became with them. Through these afternoons with Pearl, Moody slowly learned some of what their life on the road was like. They travelled lightly, 2 plates and 2 cups and a handful of mismatched silverware, a duffel of clothes each, and of course Mia's cameras. In the summer, they drove with the windows down. The Rabbit had no air conditioning in the winter. They drove by night, the heat cranked up, and in the daytime would park in a sunny spot, sleeping in the snug greenhouse of the car before starting again as the sun set. At night, Mia pushed the bags into the footwells and laid a folded army blanket across them and the back seat, forming a bed that could just hold them both. For privacy, they draped a sheet from the hatchback over the headrests of the front seats to make a little tent. At meal times, they stopped by the side of the road, feeding themselves from the paper bag of groceries behind the driver's seat. Bread and peanut butter, fruit, sometimes salami or a stick of pepperoni, if Mia found it on sale. Sometimes they drove for just a few days, sometimes for a week, until Mia found a spot that felt right, and they would stop. They would find an apartment for rent, usually a studio, sometimes an efficiency, whatever they could afford and wherever they could go month to month. For Mia did not like to be tied down. They would set up their new apartment as they had in Shaker, with cast-offs and thrift store finds made fresh. Or at least tolerable. Mia would enroll Pearl in the local school and find work enough to support them. And then Mia would begin her next project, worrying the idea like a bone, for 3 months or 4 or 6 months, until she had a set of photographs to dispatch to Anita in New York City. She would set up a dark room in the bathroom after Pearl had fallen asleep. After the first few moves, she'd gotten it down to a science. Trays for washing prints in the bathtub, a clothesline for drying strung from the shower rod, a rolled-up towel across the bottom of the door to block out any extra light. When she was finished, she stacked her trays, folded her enlarger into its case, hid her jugs of chemicals under the sink, and scrubbed the bathtub so that it was sparkling for Pearl's shower the next morning. She would crack the bathroom window and go to bed. And by the time Pearl woke, the sour smell of a developer would be gone. Once Mia mailed her photographs, Pearl always knew. They would pack up the car again, and the entire process would repeat. One town, one project, and then it was time to move on. This time, though, was to be different. "We are staying put," Pearl told him, and Moody felt suddenly, giddily buoyant, like an overfilled balloon. "My mum promised. This time we're staying for good." The itinerant artistic lifestyle appealed to him. Moody was a romantic at heart. He made the honor roll every semester, but unburdened by practicalities, he had daydreams about leaving school, traveling the country a la Jacques Kerouac, only writing songs instead of poems. Max Bach supplied him with well-worn copies of On the Road and Dharma Bums, the poems of Frank O'Hara and Rainer Maria Rilke and Pablo Neruda, and to his delight, he found in Pearl another poetic soul. She hadn't read as much as he had, of course, because they had moved so often, but she had spent most of her childhood in libraries, taking refuge among the shelves as a new girl, bouncing from school to school, absorbing books as if they were air, and in fact, she told him shyly she wanted to be a poet. She copied her favorite poems into a beat-up spiral notebook that she kept with her all times. "So they'll always be with me," she said, and when she finally allowed Moody to read some of them, he was speechless. He wanted to twine himself in the tiny curlicues of her handwriting. "Beautiful," he sighed, and Pearl's face lit up like a lantern. And the next day Moody brought his guitar, taught her to play 3 chords, and bashfully sang one of his songs for her, which he never sung for anyone else. Pearl, he soon discovered, had a fantastic memory. She could remember passages after reading them through just once. She could recall the dates of the Magna Carta and the names of the kings of England and every one of the presidents in order. Moody's grades came from meticulous studying and plenty of flashcards, but everything seemed to come easily to Pearl. She could glance at a math problem and entreat the answer while Moody dutifully worked line after line of algebra down the page. She could read an essay and put her finger at once on the most salient point or the biggest logical flaw. It was as if she had glanced at a pile of jigsaw puzzle pieces and saw the whole picture without even consulting the box. Pearl's mind, it became clear, was an extraordinary thing, and Moody could not help but admire how fast her brain worked, how effortlessly. It was a pure pleasure watching her click everything into place. The more time they spent together, the more Moody began to feel he was in 2 places at once. At any given moment, every moment he could arrange, in fact, he was there with Pearl, in the booth, at the diner, in the fork of a tree, watching her big eyes drink in everything around them as if she were ferociously thirsty. He would crack dumb jokes and tell stories and dredge up bits of trivia, anything to make her smile. And at the same time, in his mind, he was roaming the city, searching desperately for the next place he could take her, the next wonder of suburban Cleveland he could display. Because when he ran out of places to show her, he was sure she would disappear. Already he thought he saw her growing silent over the fries, prodding the last congealed lump of cheese on the plate. Already he was sure her eyes were drifting across the lake to the far shore. This was how Moody made a decision he would question for the rest of his life. Until now he had said nothing about Pearl or her mother to his family, guarding their friendship like a dragon guards treasure, silently, greedily. Deep down he had the feeling that somehow it would change everything, the way in fairy tales magic was spoiled if you shared the secret. If he had kept her to himself, perhaps the future might have been quite different. Pearl might never have met his mother or his father, or Lexi or Trip or Izzy, or if she had, they might have been people she only greeted but didn't know. She and her mother might have stayed in Shaker forever, as they'd planned. 11 months later, the Richardson house might still have been standing. But Moody did not think of himself as interesting enough to hold her attention in his own right. Had he been a different Richardson, it might have been different. His brother and sisters never worried whether other people would like them. Lexi had her golden smile and her easy laugh. Trip had his looks and his dimples. Why wouldn't people like them? Why would they ever even ask such a thing? For Izzy it was even simpler. She didn't care what people thought of her, but Moody did not possess Lexi's warmth, Trip's rugged charm, or Izzy's self-confidence. All he had to offer her, he felt, was what his family had to offer, his family itself. And it was this that led him to say one afternoon in late July, "Come over, you can meet my family." When Pearl entered the Richardsons' house for the first time, she paused with one foot on the threshold. It was just a house, she told herself. Moody lived here. But even that thought struck her as slightly surreal. From the sidewalk, Moody had nodded at it almost bashfully. "That's it," he'd said. And she had said, "You live here?" It wasn't the size. True, it was large, but so was every house on the street. And in just 3 weeks in Shaker, she'd seen even larger. No, it was the greenness of the lawn, the sharp lines of white mortar between the bricks, the rustle of the maple leaves in the gentle breeze, the very breeze itself. It was the soft smells of detergent and cooking and grass that mingled in the entryway, the one corner of the rug that flipped up like a cowlick, as if someone had mussed it and forgotten to smooth it out. It was as if instead of entering a house, she was entering the idea of a house, some archetype brought to life here before her, something she'd only heard about but never seen. She could hear signs of life in far-off rooms, the low mumble of a TV commercial, the beep of a microwave running down its count, but distantly, as if in a dream. "Come on in," Moody said, and she stepped inside. Later it would seem to Pearl that the Richardsons must have arranged themselves in a tableau for her enjoyment, for surely they could not always exist in a state of domestic perfection. There was Mrs. Richardson in the kitchen making cookies of all things, something her own mother never did, though if Pearl begged hard, she would sometimes buy a log of shrink-wrapped dough for them to slice into rounds. There was Mr. Richardson, a miniature out on the wide green lawn, deftly shaking charcoal into a shining silver grill. There was Trip, lounging on the long wrap-around sectional, impossibly handsome, one arm slung along the back as if waiting for some lucky girl to come and sit behind him. And there was Lexi, across from him in a pool of sunlight, turning her luminous eyes from the television toward Pearl, as she came into the room, saying, "Well now, and who do we have here?"